Folks, Scrimper UK here again. Now, if like me you're a scrimper, and I'm sure you probably are if you're watching this, you will over time collect lots of bits and pieces, useful things that you don't actually need at the moment but might come in useful later on. And the best way to keep them is to store them in little bins and things like you can see here. If you just chuck them in a box in the shed, you'll never find them when you want them. So this is what I've done with my scrimp parts. There's all these various little parts, as you can see, they're in little bins. Around the other side of the workshop, along the top, you'll see various bins filled with all sorts of interesting goodies. Lots of them. There's some more bins there, look, with bolts and screws and things in. And then you'll see the various small drawers that are ideal for small parts. And as I say, when you're a scrimper, you do tend to collect all these various bits and pieces for future use. The other side of the workshop, there's even more. There's various little drawers and things with various bolts and washers. Every time you take something apart that you're going to throw away, you take it apart and find useful parts like washers and things and store them away for future use. So the problem is, how do you store all these various bits and pieces? Well, as you can see, what I use is a cheaply made wooden cabinet made from scrap wood and various small bins that I've made. And in this video I'm going to show you how to make them. You can of course buy your own bins, you don't have to make them. If you want to keep your workshop tidy and stuff in the right place, you can buy bins. Now this is an example, this is a cardboard fold away packed bin. And they work alright, but they're not very strong, as you can see, and this is what happens to them half the time, especially if you get a bit of damp or anything or a bit of moisture. They just fall apart, and if you fill them up with anything, they do tend to bulge out and they get untidy and the stuff falls out, and they're not that good actually. They do the job, I suppose. They're not so bad packed close together, but they're not very good. Then you've got the fibre type like these. We had these in our stores. And they're like a kind of a fibre, cardboardy fibre material. They're better than the others, but again they do suffer the same problem. And they're not that strong, but they're stronger than the cardboard ones. And then of course you've got the ultimate ones, which are the proper purpose-made plastic bins. But then you're stuck with the exact sizes that the manufacturers of them want you to have. These are designed to clip onto a rack. They've got a little piece in the back, but you can simply stand them on a shelf, which is what I would do. I didn't actually buy these. I never buy things like this. These were actually given to me, somebody who didn't want them. I had a few of them, but I do prefer my own made ones. So now I'll show you one I've made. This is one of my own homemade bins. It's just made out of scrap wood. That's the small size. I'll show you some of the others. What I've done, I've got the medium size one like this. Then I've got the smaller size. What's that one there? And then the bigger size for large amounts of stuff. They're all basically the same length and the same height, so they match, and they'll all fit together in the system on the shelves, and you can make them whatever size you want. Obviously you don't have to stick to these sizes. You can make them wider or narrower, whatever how big your hands are. You can make them longer or shorter. As you see, most of them, I like to put a label on mine. This is just one that I've written out on a bit of card with a felt tip pen and then put some sellotape to hold it on. And this one is a rivets, and I put a picture of a rivet on because it makes it easier to identify the contents. And this one is better still, where I've actually printed these labels out on my computer, on my printer. Just using a screw picture. I've created it on Coral Draw actually, and I create my own labels, but it's time consuming, but they do look better and they're easier to read, because when you've got lots and lots of these bins on the shelf, sometimes it takes you ages to find what you want. So with a picture on the front, it makes all the difference. Anyway, that's that. So now we'll get to making the bins. As for material, I don't buy wood, I just use offcuts from things that other people are throwing away. Like this is a bit of old plywood, it's a bit scruffy. It's about 1/4 of an inch, 5/16 thick, which will do fine for the backs and fronts. It doesn't need to be too thick. Obviously if it's too thick it makes the thing too heavy, so thinner for the size is probably better. As you can see on this one, These sides are only about 1/8 of an inch, which is probably about 3mm in metric. I normally do inches, imperial, I'm a bit old fashioned. This is a piece of about 1/8 of an inch or just above plywood. You can see it's dirty, scruffy old stuff. This was the bottom of an old filing cabinet drawer that somebody threw out. And I never, if anybody's throwing wood out, I'm always around to grab it. You can use bits of, these are offcuts of plywood. Most people throw this in the bin. And you know, they make a project and they get little offcuts and throw them. I've got loads of these. I got these out of a skip actually from a factory that are throwing them away, and it's really nice birch plywood, ideal for making the little bins for your workshop. You don't have to use new wood. Obviously, this is some part of an old kitchen cabinet, some offcuts I broke up. It was one that was made in a house we lived in 40 odd years ago. I still got it, so I don't like to throw it away. It's been in my wood store. It's painted. That doesn't matter. In actual fact, it will protect the wood and stop it from getting, if you're using oily things and that, it's quite good. I tend to put that on the inside rather than the outside of the bins. And I've got various little bits. This hardwood's ideal for the bases. Like you might have some offcuts like this of hardboard. This is a bit, again, this is the bottoms of some old drawers my daughter was throwing out and I grabbed it. As you can see, I've been using this for spraying and all sorts, but it doesn't matter. That can go on the bottom, and being that it's got paint on there or some sort of finish, it makes it easier to move in and out on the shelf. So there's certainly no harm whatsoever in that, and it makes use of it rather than throwing it away. And all these bits of plywood are just odds and ends that other people have thrown out. You can see that's the back of an old wardrobe, but that'll do for it. Even if you haven't got plywood, you can use plain wood. This is just a bit of tongue and groove board, already painted. It was a bit I took out of the kitchen when I was doing the kitchen, and that's perfectly alright for the fronts and backs of bins. It's quite thick. It's probably 5/16 of an inch thick, so it's probably a bit too thick for the sides of these bins, because you don't want it too thick because they look a bit unsightly, and well, I suppose it doesn't matter what they look like, does it really? But it makes them heavier then, so I tend to use the thinner stuff for the sides. Like this is ideal. This is some just cheap plywood, and I've already just cut that roughly to size. Anyway, so that's the materials. You basically use anything. Now when it comes to tooling to make them, you don't need much. It's probably handy to have a hammer if you want to nail them, but you don't have to. You need a pencil, obviously, a ruler, and then something to mark them out with, like one of these. You don't have to have this, but I'll show you what I do with this in a moment. Or you can use one of these, or have a pattern ready. Oh, it's also helpful if you've got a glue gun. You don't have to use a glue gun. You can use normal glue, but it takes a while to stick. If you've got a hot melt glue gun like this, you can make these boxes in minutes, literally minutes, when you cut them out, and it is a boon actually. If you haven't got one, why haven't you got one? They're so handy for doing all sorts of things. You should have one, especially if you're a scrimper. Anyway, let's get this clutter out of the way and we'll make a start. Now, to make one of these bins, you're going to need two sides like this. This is for one of the smaller bins. You need two side pieces. You need a piece for the front, which goes in like that. This isn't necessarily the right size for it. And then you need a piece, a taller piece to fit in the back. This is too short, so you'll need a longer one which does the back. So it's going to look something like that when it's finished. And then you simply need a piece of hardboard to go on the bottom, like this. Now, if you're going to make these bins, you're probably going to make quite a few. I've made hundreds of them actually for my sheds and workshops, and I always make a batch of them at a time. It's easier to cut one out and keep it as a pattern like I've done here. This is my pattern because it says pattern on it, so it must be. The reason I write that on there is that otherwise I should damn well use it, and then next time I want it I should find I've used it on a bin and I haven't got my pattern. So that's just a pattern. That's a pattern for the larger size, and you can make any size you want. When you're drawing out the pattern, you don't have to put this slope on here, this fancy slope. It's better if you have the front lower. You could simply just cut the corner off, just draw a straight line across there, cut the corner off and use that as the front. Or the other way of doing it, if you've got one of these things, you can get these cheap in stationery places. You just use that corner there. It's just a flexible thing. I find them quite useful in woodwork, and you can just bend it to whatever shape you like. Say you want it about like that, and then just simply draw around it like that, and now you've got your cutting line. Or you can use one of these French curve type thing, and you can, if you want a fancy shape, you can draw around that. Or you can just do it by hand, or you can get a compass or a tin or something and draw around. It doesn't matter, but try to get a nice shape, because, you know, why not? If you're doing it, you might as well do it and make a decent job of it. But once you've done the one, you can use that for all of them. Now, there's several ways of cutting these out. We're talking about the sides for the moment. The other parts doesn't matter, they're quite simple. You can have your piece of wood if you've got a piece like that, and perhaps you haven't got the tools to do it any other way. You can just simply lay the pattern onto the piece of wood like that, and just simply draw around it, like so. And then you can just do as many as you like. And if you put them close up like that, then one cutting line will do two, so to speak. Now what I try and do, you can just do them like this, but what I tend to try and do is I try and plan mine so that I use every available piece of the wood rather than wasting some of the wood. I might cut into there, or you could put, for example, say you could put them perhaps like this. You could even design it so that when you cut it out, that's minimum wastage, so you could get two out of that side rather than one the other way, and then you could do probably 6 sides out of that one piece. So that's one way. So you can just draw the pattern out and simply cut it out with a fret saw or a scroll saw or even a band saw, or you could use a hand coping saw if you haven't got any machinery. But some of these little fret saws are so cheap to buy, and they are handy in the workshop for doing things like this, or a simple band saw. The other way of doing it, of course, is to actually, rather than cut them out of a piece like that, and that's perfectly easy, I do that sometimes, you can cut your strips for your sides. This is some I've done already for a larger container, like the big cardboard one I showed you earlier. I've cut these out ready for that. So they're all the right size, apart from the length, which I can do later. And then all I need to do is simply draw that front piece on, like so. Actually, that wants to be down a bit. I think that's a bit high for the front, so you can alter it just by doing it like that. And then all you've got to do is cut that off and cut them to length, and that's the side ready made. So what I also tend to do, rather than cut each one individually, sometimes I just get a batch of them like this. I sellotape them together and then just cut all 3 at once. I mean, obviously it's easier if you've got just a coping saw or a hand saw to do one at a time, but they don't take long anyway. But you can do them in batches. So that's basically how you do the sides. You can either do them that method, cut the wood first, or you can have wood ready that size, or you can lay them out and cut them out that way. So what I'm going to do now, I'll show you how to cut the front out. You probably know anyway, but I'll just show it. You've got to show me, start doing something, haven't I?